people who want this land and acknowledge their elders past, present and emerging. And I'll hand back over to you. Thank you.
Okay, excellent. And I'll make sure that. So for those people who haven't figured out, my name's Assoc DeSilva, and I'm here at RMIT University. And some of the research, or really, I'm not going to present my research as such, but what I'm going to do is to present some observations based on research that I've been doing, as well as listen to what other people have said about the area of particularly housing and customer vulnerability. So I've been looking at housing now for a number of years. And if there's one thing that I've learnt, it's this, and it's probably true of everything that will be talked about today, is that you cannot put it into some kind of little compartment and think that it doesn't affect every aspect of someone's life. The fact of the matter is, housing is intrinsic. And the fact of the matter, is this: if there's something going wrong, in this area, chances are there's probably at least one other thing going on, at least in one other area. And so one thing that I did is I've got a quote here. This is a quote straight off one of the government websites. But when we think about this, where does housing come into it? And of course, there are different forms of vulnerability that you might think of in terms of housing. But in this particular context, just thinking of money. And if we do think of money, of course, I'm an economist, so I'm also going to speak of money. But you've got to remember that every time we see these types of problems, there are other things being linked to it, that is depression, anxiety, and everything else. And so we need to be very careful about when we do talk about this, because we're not going to just talk about it in a single dimension, because it has multiple dimensions and it is complex. And that's something I want to really get across today in the next 3 minutes. Now, what I did as an economist is I went into another area that I am totally unfamiliar with, that perhaps many of you here are better at this than I am, and that's called Maslow's hierarchy of need. I looked at this a long, long time ago, and the more I have been reflecting on this, is the more I begin to appreciate how much housing is integral to every layer, and that's the point that I want to get across. Okay? So even if we start with the bottom point, we are talking about shelter. We're talking about the actual ability to be able to close the door at night and to actually know this is your place and this is a safe place. And that really leads into the second bit, talking about safety. Oops, Daisy, that's not that bit. Looking into the next place, the fact that it is stable, the fact that it is somewhere where you can go. It is a place that you can relax in. It's a place that you can be yourself, which is the next one, and talk about a sense of belonging, which is really important for all of us. And I can continue to go up that list, but I don't want to waste my time or yours. I can talk about it further if you like. But really, I just want to say is that the reason why I put this chart here is this, is that if something is going awry in the housing space, okay, it is going to flow over to nearly every aspect of somebody's psychology and every aspect of well-being. And that's why it's important. And that's why it's important to think about. Now, getting into one of my own more comfortable areas, thinking about economics, I just wanted to very quickly present to you is that economists do think about housing, they think about housing a lot. So if you look on the right-hand side here, this is actually something from the OECD. And the OECD has a way of measuring individual well-being. And you can see here on this particular panel, I've got the red arrow pointing to it. Housing and infrastructure is actually fundamental, or is recognised to be fundamental to well-being from an economics point of view. And of course, really borrowing from that previous slide, it relates to everything else. If you have stable housing, and I'm not just talking about a house, I'm talking about the physical structure here. I'm talking about everything else that goes with it, whether it be the people you're living with, but also the quality of that structure, the actual location of that structure. All those things are going to determine somebody's well-being, because it's going to determine jobs. It's going to be actually able to determine your consumption possibilities. It's going to determine your health. It is going to be looking at your feelings and meaning and so on and so forth. All these things, housing is intrinsically linked to. And so that's why it's important. Now, a little bit of data, because at the end of the day, I'm actually an econometrician. This is very, very simple data. Very, very quickly, is that my 4-minute rule? Excellent, because I'm nearly finished. I have 7 tiles here representing the different territories and states of Australia. In each of these tiles, there are 3 numbers. Now, the numbers are fairly up to date. The first number in each tile is the house price, so the median house price. The second, rather than last, I'll go next, is the rent per week. And this is data no more than about 3 months old. The MP are the mortgage payments. Now, the first thing I want just to draw your attention to is this, right? Is that house prices vary. So you look at that first row in each of the tile, you can see they vary. You can see Darwin, it's pretty good to buy a house. Most of us probably here could comfortably afford a house in Darwin. Sydney, not so much. Okay, but have a look at rent. My point being here is this, is that the house price story tells a different story from the rental story. Okay, and that's important to remember as well. Housing vulnerability, there are different dimensions. You can't afford to generalise. Okay, they're actually going to be different aspects. The middle number is just a very simple calculation based on if you have to borrow 70% of the value of that median price, that's how much you're paying back per month. Now, if you put that in, if you go to Sydney where you're paying over $5,000 a month to support that, I don't think there's many of us here that would comfortably actually be able to do that. Okay, but again, different states, different things, because there are different supply and demand going on at different sectors. Now, I've just talked about, though, if you are looking to buy a house, if you happen to own a house, and here's the actual number form that's coming in, if you're somebody who's nearing retirement, who owns a house, having high house prices is actually a good thing. Because what it does, it perhaps gives the person the ability to access that equity and support their retirement living and to be able to realise some of their goals. That's another aspect of my research. I don't want to cloud the waters with that just yet, but feel free to ask me about it afterwards. But again, I'm just saying this. House prices and increasing house prices aren't bad for everybody. There are cohorts within our actual population that will actually benefit as a result. Last thing is this, housing is one of many things that people pay for. This is an average household budget and stock here, but I just want to point out is that again, it is just one of many factors that actually are causing increases in cost. Okay, that's it for me.
Terrific.